You know, it's really pretty awesome to have Naima as our intern. And we know that it's summertime and people are out enjoying summer, but we also know that people will be clicking on this to watch it later. So many times people ask us that, and we are grateful to you that that you will give us a part of your shiur tonight. And why don't you tell us what your shiur is about, Naima?
Yeah, so I wanted to spend some time this summer thinking about Bein Adam L'Chavero and what that means and how we can bring it into our own lives and relationships and what even is it. So
and
the
it was
first
titled Ahavat Chinam. Is that what was tonight was?
Yes, so tonight is Ahavat Chinam. So it's the third in this series. The first one was what is Sinat Chinam, and thinking about trying to find a working definition of Sinat Chinam and Bein Adam L'Chavero in terms of how we relate to God. And then the second week, which was last week, I was, wanted to talk about tzedek and how to bring the idea of tzedek into our interpersonal relationships and what role tzedek has, what even is it, and the idea of justice and interpersonal relationships and working towards a more just, and this week we're talking about a more just and loving world and loving community.
So I love that because I think Ahavat Chinam is something that's so missing, and I'd love to even hear. I'm excited to hear what you're going to tell me and teach us about Ahavat Chinam. So please take it away, Naima.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link, as usual, I'm going to put the link, the Sefaria source sheet in the chat, and then I'm also going to share my screen. And if you don't want to, have it open in your own tab, just smooch it, pull it that way. So here, share screen. Okay, we all see the first source there. You don't see my tab of notes, right? You just see the source sheet. Nothing like some good transparency. So this shiur, I wanted to talk about and think about how we can bring love into our, interpersonal relationships and what that would mean. What does it mean to have Ahavat Chinam? And so the first question, which is related to this really beautiful Rav Kook source, is what is Ahavat Chinam? Is it, the opposite of Sinat Chinam, of baseless hatred, or is there something else going on? Could there be something else going on? So Rav Kook in Orot HaKodesh, he teaches V'im nechavnu, wow, my Hebrew is not great today. V'im nechavnu, v'nechrav ha'olam imanu al yedei Sinat Chinam. If we were destroyed, and the entire world was destroyed with us, on account of Sinat Chinam, of baseless hatred, nashuv lihibanot ha'olam imanu yibaneh al yedei Ahavat Chinam. Then we will come back to be rebuilt, and the world will be rebuilt, and that will be through Ahavat Chinam. And baseless love, if we're going to use the same exact translation as we usually use for Sinat Chinam, or unconditional love, we could say, or just there are a lot of different ways we could translate it or think about it. But the question that I at least am thinking of, after reading this and seeing this, I think it's a beautiful idea, and I think it really relates to what we've been talking about and what we've been thinking about during this season of the 3 weeks in Tisha B'Av, and how we can repent and build better communities so that we don't come apart at treating each other poorly. But here we have maybe a way to avoid that in the first place, or even to rebuild something better, rebuild something, learn from those mistakes. So we can rebuild the world through Ahavat Chinam. But then the question is, what is Ahavat Chinam? What does that mean to have baseless love or unconditional love? So I found this really great Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that I thought that I wanted to bring and I wanted to talk about with you. So this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, it's towards the end of Parak Hey, of the 5th parak, says Kol ha'ava shehi tluya b'davar batel davar batela ahava. So all love that depends on something or is contingent upon something, whatever the thing is, once that thing is nullified or goes away or doesn't exist anymore, then so will that love that depends on whatever the thing is. Mishnah's going to give some examples. But she'ena tluya b'davar, a love that is not dependent on a specific thing, eina b'tela la'olam, that love is never canceled, it's never nullified. So basically, unconditional love is everlasting. So the Mishnah is going to give us some examples. Ezuhi ahava hatluya b'davar. So ahavat Amnon v'Tamar. So what is this love that is dependent on something? That is the love of Amnon and Tamar. I like the translation that says Amnon for Tamar, because, you know, the story of Amnon and Tamar, Amnon being one of David HaMelech's children who raped his half-sister Tamar, I would prefer not to use the love in terms of a reciprocal relationship there. But when we think about, I believe the pasuk does use the shoresh of ahav when talking about how Amnon felt towards Tamar. I don't remember 100%. But the idea is that once, you know, he got what he wanted, once he, you know, he raped her and you know, conquered or whatever, then he didn't love her anymore. He didn't care for her. It was dependent on what he couldn't have, and he got it, and, you know, and that's it. He didn't love her anymore, which is not the ideal, I would say. But this ideal of unconditional love, the Mishnah is going to tell us that a love that is not dependent on any one thing. So Ahavat David v'Yonatan. So an example of unconditional love is the love that David and Yonatan had. And I'm going to leave that vague, whether, you know, there's a lot of writing and a lot of thought about what kind of love and what the kind of relationship David and Yonatan had. Was it a sexual one? Was it a romantic one? Was it a brotherly one? Was it, you know, mentor, mentee? On some level, it matters in terms of seeing representation in different forms of love. And on some level, it doesn't. At least that is, you know, speaking as a cis woman in a heterosexual relationship, it's very easy for me to say it doesn't matter that David and Yonatan were gay or were not gay. But in terms of a disclaimer, I think, you know, it's ambiguous. It's not clear. It's not explicit one way or the other. So there's something to learn no matter how we read that relationship. And obviously for the people who need to see themselves, you know, it's good to be able to see yourself. So then the question is, what does that mean, that they had this love that was not dependent on anything? And David and Yonatan as this paradigm, I'm curious what you all think of that in terms of, you know, there are plenty of examples that that the Mishnah could have brought about it, unconditional love, but they brought this, you know, example of David and Yonatan. So I'm curious what you think about that. Why bring David and Yonatan as the example? Yeah, Rabbinic bracha.
I wonder, I'd never thought of that before exactly that way. It feels like it might be easy to bring a parent-child or a biological relationship because you're supposed to, we hope, we strive for unconditional love. Unconditional, that's what we talk about, is unconditional love, parents and child or other relationships. But here they chose it, they chose each other. So perhaps it's a paradigm of finding somebody in your life where you have unconditional love, having a bestie through ups and downs, through good and bad. And that's might be a reason.
Yeah, I love that idea of choice, of forming your own relationships instead of the ones that are foisted upon you by, you know, the circumstances of your birth. While that is also important. Yeah, Mom.
I agree with, I was thinking along the lines of Rabbinic's bracha as well, that it's a choice to love unconditionally. That it's not something that just happens, that it's a thought out decision, because as Rabbinic said, it wasn't a relationship, it's a relationship they chose. But I think even within familial relationships, loving unconditionally is a choice. And it's something you have to, I think it's something you aspire to, like
Right. No, I think that's exactly, I think there's this tension here that it's easy to think of, you know, parent-child or siblings or whatever, you know, biological or familial relationship as like, oh, obviously that's unconditional, your family, you know, so we're going to use this example that isn't family. But then even within that, you know, what we would think of as obvious, it's not. You still have to choose. You still have to opt into loving someone like that.
And also one wouldn't think, because David had what to gain from Yonatan. And Yonatan should have gotten rid of David, because David was his rival. So they both chose the relationship over the politics, over the power, over, like, for them, I think it was even a harder choice, because on the face of it, Yonatan should have hated David, should have been jealous of him, should like, if the way Shaul showered praise on him, he didn't shower on Yonatan like that. And yet he chose to see what was special in David and that he was chosen by Hashem and like made the choice to love this person.
Right, to choose actually someone outside of the family over his family. And that itself is a complicated and nuanced and fraught example we have.
Yeah, like he chose David over Shaul.
Yeah. What were you going to say?
So I dafka connect that to the first part about Ahavat shetluya b'davar. I think that the example chosen with these two couples is that David and Yonatan were meant to, whenever in the timeline they would have met, it would have been an Ahavat Chinam. Maybe to the degree that that's because of their personalities and who they were. I don't know. Whereas Amnon v'Tamar, it was this specific timeline and specific, case scenario that you called it a type of love.
Like it's more situational. But with David and Yonatan, it was about who they are and how they related to each other. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that in some ways, even, like you said, you're connecting it to the term of tluya b'davar. Like it's not even that it's like, if this thing wasn't there, would there still be that? It's not even after the fact, it's preemptive to the fact. Like if it wasn't there, would they have, had these feelings? Maybe, maybe not. But the whole point is that if it's conditional, that condition is like a third party in there. I also, as you were saying that, something else completely different popped into my head, which is that Amnon and Tamar are supposed to have an unconditional love. They're siblings. They're supposed to, or they're half siblings. They're supposed to, feel like have actually like a good relationship, a good healthy relationship that doesn't end the way it did. And David and Yonatan, by all accounts, they should have, tried to kill each other. But again, it's that choice. Even within what we're expected to have, it's still a choice to opt into that. So that's where my mind went when we started. But I like your framing better because it almost takes it away from these two exact examples, Yael, and you're making the examples the paradigms instead of getting in the weeds of why these specific people. But this is all true. I knew once I put parents in a room about unconditional love, they definitely have things to say. So a lot of what we were saying, is brought up is kind of what Vartanur, the parish on the Mishnah, it's what he brings up. So he says, so in regards to the conditional love, right? Kol hava shehitzluya b'davar batel, she'enu mitkayem, k'sheyitbatel hadavar shehaya siba la'ota ahava, gam ha'ava batela. So he says, right, when that, it doesn't last, conditional love, because when the thing comes, it's going to go away. The love goes away. But when this love is not reliant on a thing that can be nullified or canceled or destroyed, but instead on something permanent, right? Kogon ahavat tzadikim v'hachachamim, such as the love of tzadikim, of righteous people, and the sages, the wise people. That is never nullified. If it's something permanent, it can't, even if it's a thing, it's something permanent, it's not going to be, the love will still last. Excuse me. In the same way that, if the thing it is relying on, the love is relying on, doesn't perish, then the love will always survive. What I find most striking here is the idea of the love of the tzadikim and the chachamim. Like this idea of there being tzedek in an unconditional love, of there being justice, of there being, a compassionate justice, of something more in what unconditional love means and what unconditional love means and how it means, I guess, not like how to do it so much. But I don't know, to me that stood out to me. And I thought, I don't know, like thinking about like David and Yonatan loving each other for their whole beings, right? And they risked their lives for each other to, in this situation to bring about, what was right. Shaul was not supposed to be king anymore. Yonatan was not going to be the king. And they used their love, their relationship, their connection to bring forward something more. I could rant about Shaul for many hours. I'm like hesitant to get into that. He's one of my, I don't know, I think he's a fascinating character. But I wanted to bring in this, yes, Rabbinic Bracha.
I don't know that I ever saw this, and I'm really surprised that this is what he chose. I wonder why he chose Tzaddikim and Chachamim, and this is, I happen to have seen a Facebook post that somebody sent me about a woman who said that she was abused as a minor by a very well-known and well-respected Rav, and that's like, it is echoing in my mind and not sitting well with me, that they could only be perfect. So
yeah,
I don't want to get into whether to believe this woman or not. That's a separate issue. But we know ourselves that not, so I'm sorry that it's just not sitting well with me.
No, thank you for bringing that up. I think
they're not perfect.
No, that's so important. And that's something I think about a lot and have been raised to think about a lot. What happens when the people we trust aren't trustable, and the Gelman and the Rabbanim are not actually doing what they're supposed to do,
or whoever it is. I mean, Bill Cosby, whatever.
Yeah, no.
People who are icons.
The art and the artists, right? So those are huge questions that I don't know if we can ever find satisfactory answers to. But what I am going to say is that with regard to speaking about the tzaddikim and the chachamim, I think here I would define it in a tautological kind of way, that the ones who act like a tzaddik, who act like a chacham, then that's what makes them a tzaddik and a chacham, because there are plenty of chachamim and
that's nice,
right? That they're never going to have the opportunity to have their knowledge be empowered or disseminated, and they're still wise. So similar to a tzaddik. So that's how I respond in this context.
I have to go to Mincha Ma'ariv, but I'm just wondering, and I know you also want to speak. I'm wondering, the Chachamim is something that's outwardly that you hear the Chokhmah, whereas the Tzaddikim is the inwardly. And I wonder if we could put those together. So somebody who is Tzaddik Chacham, we would never lose our respect for them. So
I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. Thank you.
I'm going to have to watch this afterwards.
Find out how it ends. All right, Mom, what were you going to say? Mom, you're muted.
What I was thinking, again, piggybacking on Rabbinic Bracha, is that a tzaddik and a chacham wouldn't abuse a child.
Right.
By definitionally, just because they've taken on a name of Rav, or they've once, like Bubby Joy said to me, like, if someone you respect does things that aren't respectable or aren't good, then don't respect them. They aren't respectable people. Like, just because society decides on something doesn't give someone a name. Like, I don't think we have to buy into that. And also what I was wondering about conditional and unconditional love. The love of for Amnon from Tamar was Asur. He raped a half sister.
Yeah, it's Asur on every account. Yeah,
right. It's just like on every level.
Don't do it.
There's no God in there. There's no godliness. There's no sense of fulfilling your avdus for Hashem. Yeah. Whereas Yonatan and David, their love was a kli for their avdus of Hashem. That their relationship served their primary relationship, that of serving God. Which, like, it was even like Yonatan was able to say, like, I love my father, but there's God. Like, this is what God wants. Yeah. Which I think is a whole interesting thing to unpack. But I think that's
how did he even know, like, plot wise? I have no idea.
But the idea of having, like they say, it's three beings make a baby, like a husband, a wife, the mother, the father, and Hashem. And like, I really think if Hashem is not in your business, then it is something. So we're going to get
transient.
To that. Oh,
we are going to get to that. No, because I think, and I actually, like, I think I'm going to move, like, I want to go to the next source, which, I'm curious how we can connect it, how you can connect it. I know how my thoughts of connecting it. So just to kind of, wrap up this first part of coming to a definition of Ahavat Chinam, or at least a working definition, it's, loving someone unconditionally despite, their flaws or their actions from this place of tzedek, and, bringing some godliness into the way you connect. But then the question is, okay, now what? Like, great, that's wonderful to aspire to. Like, I think that's all lofty goals. I would love to say, that's how all of my relationships, and connections are, but I know that's not, because, things happen. Mom, I'm just gonna mute you. So then in terms of other ways to think about love and in relationship, I brought this, often quoted pasuk from Vayikra, right? Lo tukom v'lo titoret b'nei amecha v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha ani Adonai. You shall not take vengeance. You should not bear a grudge against, the members of your nation. Love your fellow as yourself. I am God. So I know that we could go for hours just on this one pasuk and figuring out. I know that because there's so much there, especially about, the first half of the pasuk and the connection to the second half of the pasuk. So I know that I want to acknowledge that, and I want to focus exclusively on the second part with regards to what does it mean to have ahava, or, what does it mean, v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha? What does that even mean? Love your fellow as yourself. I can't love the fellow as myself, because that's how I love the fellow, and I love myself differently because I'm a different person. And the context for how I love different people is different. Like, the feeling I have for my younger siblings is very different than for my friends, or for the teachers I love, for my husband. Like, it's all different. So, that's maybe, what does that mean? That's a bigger question, than perhaps we can answer. But I want to bring this sugya from Masechet Shabbat, which is often quoted, in context with this pasuk, and often quoted in plenty of other contexts as well. So Shuv Ma'aseh B'goy Echad Sheba Lifnei Shammai. So this is another incident, right? Another thing happened with this one, non-Jew person who was looking to convert, probably, who came to Shammai. Amar Lo, Giareni al Manat Talmideni Kol HaTorah Kula Kashani Omed Al Regel Achad. So this, potential convert said to Shammai and said, convert me on the condition that you can tell me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot. And Shammai smacked him and sent him away. He's like, no, don't ask me all these questions. Don't, this is not for real. He didn't take him seriously. And then this, I never knew that this, insert from what I see in Steinsaltz, that, the builder's cubit and that Shammai was a builder. I guess I never put that together. The more you know. So then this same person, right, Baal Lifnei Hillel, who he went to Hillel and said, and Gyare, so Hillel converted him, Amar Lo, and said to him, Ta'alach snei l'chaverecha la tavid. No, do not do what is hateful to you, don't do to someone else, right? Idach perushahu, skipped a line. Zohi kol haTorah kula, Idach perushahu zil gamor. So he says, that's the whole Torah. The rest is drasha, right? The rest is commentary and rabbis arguing and, kids in the Bein Midrash trying to figure it out. Go learn. So that's often, cited in context with the v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha. Now, I know that this sugya doesn't have the exact wording of v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, but I think for me at least, the idea of not doing something, bad, don't do something bad, I'm now getting all the, basically treat someone else like you want to be treated and love your fellow as yourself. They seem pretty similar. They might not be the exact same thing. But the idea of what does it mean that this is the foundation of all Torah, right? That don't treat others the way you want to be treated, or don't treat others the way you don't want to be treated. How is that the foundation of all of Torah? That's a pretty big claim. I mean, if anyone could make that claim, it probably would be Hillel. He probably did actually know Kol HaTorah Kula and could do it on one foot. But even so, what's going on here? How is that the foundation?
I have a question, is this any connection, like where is the picture of us about everybody being created to tell
Mm.
Because the way I was taught about this, after that, is that what you're loving in the other person is the godliness in the other person.
Right, that's what makes them your peer.
Yeah, if you can't find anything else, like that person has a bit of God in them, and you need to find a way to love them and care about them. And it's a challenge sometimes,
So I would answer by saying I think that brings itself to a different conversation, which is what about when it's really hard to do this? Like, what is that like? What if I really don't like this person? What if they're unpleasant to be around? I don't like, their opinions. They interrupt me. They're that guy on the first date who doesn't ask me any questions. Like, I don't want to love this guy, right? Like, this is not it. So that I think is where I would put that source, or how I would address, that question, and, getting me thinking about what does it mean that someone is rayacha, that is your peer? What if someone who isn't my peer, someone who isn't my friend? Am I obligated to love them also? Yeah, that's I think where I would place that, how I would think about that. And I think, right, the idea of Tzelem Elohim and someone being created b'Tzelem Elohim, and you could say that's the project of the Torah, but even that I feel is like a intense claim. But what does that mean? That loving our friends as ourselves, or treating them the way we want to be treated, like, is that really, like, I'm trying to think of like there are some mitzvot or some things that, like, is this really it? Like, I'm thinking about like korbanot, right? I'm thinking about shiluach hakein, actually. Shiluach hakein could work, right? You send away the mother bird because, rachamim, you want to treat other people. Mercy is a good thing to have. Even so, it's when you, in general, when like rules are made, general rule, what is it, like generalizations are always incorrect. It's something like that. Like, I kind of want to find all these cases and try and figure out how it's the foundation. Yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong. The starting phrase that you started with, Ahavat Chinam, is not exactly what's talked about in the last couple of things that you were reading, because there it's by elimination. Lo tinkom, lo titor. If you do not do this and do not do that, then you are good to your peer, because you wouldn't do that to yourself. And the same here, the last and chavercha, do not hate your friend. So it's a little bit different.
Very astute, yeah.
So there's two levels here of showing love. One is the active, and one is the not the act.
Right. I think we were talking about this last week also with regards to tzedakah. I think you were the one who brought that up, right? The idea of like, is, being like how we interact with people, you could not stop, but you could also not, there's ways, like, you can walk by and just smile at the person asking for cash, or you could, actually stop and have a conversation and buy them food, or you could just ignore them totally or say something nasty. So there are all these levels of how to interact with people. And, here too, the idea of how to love someone, is it, do you show your love by, not being a jerk? Do you show your love by, like, treating them the way you would treat yourself?
So I think that if we're taking it to what we're talking about, it's about how the Torah wants us to live, and how the Torah wants us to live as a society within the context of the klal. And a society cannot exist in a normalcy in a world where people are hateful towards each other and are doing negative acts to each other, and making sure that you're maintaining that love towards each other, whether you can add different adjectives, respect, or abstaining from doing negative things, or whatever it is, then there's a possibility, to be more connected with, also to your first shiur, ben adam lemakom, ben adam lechavero, to be connected higher.
what I'm hearing, and I think I really like this idea, is that it seemed like you phrased it like a progression. Like the basic level is, right, like don't do these things, right? Like don't murder people, right? Don't bear a grudge, don't do all these things. Once you have that as a baseline, then you move into the active, how you show that in a positive way. Like how do you go out of your way to show that you love someone and that you want to build, community about love. But the basic level is don't be a jerk. Like for some people, maybe that's their challenge. Maybe that's their avoda. I would hope fewer people. Before we move on to the next source, Mom, what do you want to say?
What struck me a little bit was like Erickson's hierarchy of needs. People are egocentric. Like if you see a baby, like I just spent the day with a baby, it's all id all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then their ego is developing, and then what makes us into mention is your, the parental voice becoming your super ego. But I think like before we can, like that is hateful to you, do not do to another. That is the entire Torah. Like there's no Torah if we're inwardly directed.
Mm.
Like if we have to go against our nature and turn ourselves outward to connection and love, and everything else really, like I think Hillel's right, is gravy. Like once you can like turn that egocentrism and like say, I'm not the center of the world.
Right.
I think
like at that point, like if you're treating everybody respectfully, it's good if you keep kosher, but for like, it's also important to treat everyone respectfully. Maybe that's a little bit of a charif.
But like even what, Rabbi Wasserman Zachar Lebracha would say, the Torah doesn't start with Lech Lecha. It also doesn't start with the first mitzvah. It doesn't start with the first Jew. It doesn't start with the first mitzvah. It starts with humanity, and you have to be a basic human.
Yeah.
And before you can think about and that's the entire Torah. The rest is interpretation. Like you've got to be a mensch.
Yeah, that's why
I called my son Adam, by the way. Honestly, that's the reason.
I love that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I love that. It's actually very funny how much my mom and I are on the same wavelength, because as you're talking about facing inwards and facing outwards, that that language actually does show up in this next source. This next source is a really beautiful kli yakar on V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha that Rabbinic Bracha actually helped me, hammer out the details of the translation. So credit where credit is due. So, and this is abridged. He had more to say, but this is the part that I brought. So ki kol mitzvot Torah heim al shnei sugi. So all of the mitzvot of the Torah are in two categories. Some of this may, remind us of what we've been talking about in previous weeks. So hachadhu, the first is hamitzvot shebein adam lamakom baruch hu v'yasod l'kulam ha'amuna. So, why am I blanking? So this first category is mitzvot that are between, a human and God, bless God, right? And that is, and the foundation for all of those is faith, right? Yeah, and the foundation of them all is faith, right? That bein adam lamakom, it is emuna, is centered around that's how it, goes together. And now he's also speaking specifically about the Aseret HaDibrot. So if you were here for the first week, I brought a different source, mapping out how the mapping out the connections between and the parallelisms, how one of the first half of the Aseret HaDibrot map onto the second half. So he's saying something similar, but not quite the same here. So b'chamisha hasheni hu hamitzvot shebein adam lechavero v'yasod l'kulam pasuk v'ahavta l'recheach kamo. So the second group of 5 are the mitzvot that are between humans, between a person and their friend. And the foundation for all of those is the pasuk v'ahavta l'recheach kamo. Love your fellow as yourself. You shall love your fellow as yourself. Okay, so we have bein adam lemakom, between a person and God, and all of those, mitzvot, those first 5 commandments, those are, they are foundational. Faith is foundational to them. They are foundational to faith. And the second, chunk are the ones between us, between each other. And the way you sum that up, in the pithy soundbite is the pasuk v'ahavta l'orecha kamocha. So here's where my mom was reading my mind, or reading the Kli Yakar's mind. I don't know. So umita'am zeh, accordingly, right, according to this reasoning, hayu hakrovim porsim knafim lamala machloi kelpei mala neged hamitzvot shebein adam lamakom. So, according to this reason, the krovim, the cherubs that were on top of the aron, the ark that held the 10 commandments, that held the luchot, these krovim, their wings were spread outwards, up and outwards, to represent, to represent, or as equated to, to help us, to symbolize, perhaps is the better word, to symbolize the mitzvot bein adam lamakom. So when the krovim had their wings up and out, that's connecting us to lamala, connecting us to God. Upneihem ish el achav keneged hamitzvot shebein ish v'chavero. But the kruvim, they were supposed to face each other, like they faced each other. So that represents the mitzvot between each other, between me and you. That even as the kruvim's wings are going outwards, they're still right. They're still making eye contact. They're still interacting with each other. And then he goes on. Kshamar kan al regal achad hainu yusod achad lokosuk. And as Hillel said, here on one foot, the foundation. The 1 foot story is the foundation for both of these categories, right? But al kain amar lo pasuk b'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, and that's why he said b'ahavta l'orecha kamocha. But al regal zeha mido kol mitzvot shebein adam l'chavero. And on this foot, he established, right, for him all of the mitzvot bein adam l'chavero. But amar lo gam sofa pasuk, and he told him also the end of the pasuk, ani Adonai, right? B'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, ani Adonai. Love your fellow as yourself, I am God. Dahainu hayusod she'alav ha'amir chabakuk kol mitzvot Torah v'hainu ha'emunah ba'adonai. So on this foundation, right, Hillel established, the commandments between man and his fellow, or between people. And he also taught the end of the verse, right, I am Adonai. And that's the foundation that Habakkuk put all of the commandments. There was a bit earlier talking about how, Habakkuk condensed all of the commandments to Emunah, and I cut that out because it's not so relevant to what this kruvim imagery that I wanted to bring. He goes on, and it's a lot of other beautiful ways of thinking about all of this, but here we have, right, the kruvim outwards and facing each other, and we have the fact that we have to l'orecha kamocha ani Adonai, right? Love your fellow as yourself, and I'm God. So God's saying, also God is there, be aware. So that's at least, some of my initial thoughts. I'm curious what is coming up for you as we read this source. What this imagery evokes for you of the kruvim with their wings, wings out and up and their faces towards each other. Yeah.
It's a circle. If you ever look and learn about the parts of the Mishkan.
Yeah.
So it's like their eye contact, and then the wings go back in a circle, and maybe that symbolizes a completion of something.
That it's not just these two planes of face, facing each other and the wings, but it's actually all one and the same.
Right. So the
And
symbology
visually, I would see that
of
as
two.
well.
There are only two of them. There's no more.
Mm-hmm.
So ben adam lamakom, ben adam lechavaro, two, and the wings that are connecting to the top, like you said, and their eye contact facing each other.
I love how you took the mapping out of the symbolism that the Kli Yakar started, and you finished it by saying there are two kruvim in the first place. There could have been more, right? There are all sorts of numbers we could use, right? But the idea is that there may be these two ways we think about doing mitzvot, but actually they're all the same. They're all part of the same thing. They're all connected. Which one is which? You could say which one of the kruvim is, ben adam lamakom, which one is ben adam l'chavero, but it doesn't matter. I love that. I'm going to be thinking about that circular imagery. Yeah, Mom.
Also, when I'm thinking, I could be wrong because it's been a long time since I've studied it, but I can't remember if it's on Yom Kippur or another time, when things are well with Bnei Israel, the kruvim face each other.
Yes.
But when they're not, they don't face each other.
Yes.
So the circle's broken, the
Mm.
connection is broken. And I find that interesting because their wings are still up. So it's the service of God in theory is still going on. But when they're in disfavor with Hashem, they're not making that eye contact.
Right.
The humanity piece is missing. So I don't know
No,
if that,
I think you're exactly right about that. Bring that in. We were talking the first session. We were talking about the sugya. I don't remember off the top of my head which Masechet it was, because I think in Yoma it also appears a bunch of other places saying that Bayit Rishon was destroyed on account of all these awful things people were doing, right? Like the murder and the adultery and all these bad things. But then Bayit Sheni was destroyed on account of Sinat Chinam, which was it was just equivalent to the other three, the big three. And that, connotes that in some way that they were still doing all the things they should have been doing, right? They were still offering korbanot. They were still giving, or maybe they were giving maaser, I'm not sure. They were still offering korbanot. They were still, making sure the urn was up before Shabbos. They were still, checking their eggs and their broccoli, but didn't matter. Like there's all these psukim in the Nevi'im, right? And Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu saying, of God saying, I don't want your korbanot. I want you to be nice to each other. The translation, Naima Gelman 2022.
but also what's interesting, aren't the big three also Sinas Chinam?
That I think is a really good question. Avodah Zarah, I would say maybe, maybe not. But maybe it's not baseless, right? If someone kills, someone I love, I'm going to go kill them. I want to kill them. I want revenge, and that's not baseless. That's based. But I do hear your point. I do hear your point.
But even Avodah Zarah is
No, I hear where you're trying to go with it. I think you need to work on it,
but-
and I think you need to work on it. I think you're onto something, and I think you could be onto something. I think you need to workshop it more. Because and then even there's even a bigger question of why these three and what does it mean? So that I think that could be part of that same question. I'm curious what you come up with. But I think that that other idea, right, of that the Kruvim facing away from each other, with their arms still stretched, but then just like once you miss one part of the equation, then you can't get the answer. And thinking about that, the way we interact with each other, right? The eye contact we do or don't make, on a metaphorical or maybe literal level, right? It's not just how I act towards you or how I act towards the person who, isn't going to let me in when I'm trying to merge before the exit or whatever, right? Like, it's also about God, right? It's like the way we interact with each other. It's also about God. God is involved. Like we've seen today and in previous weeks, and perhaps in our own lives, even that Bein Adam l'Chaveiro is not actually all that separate from Bein Adam l'Makom. So, what does it mean? How can we be like the Kruvim, right? How can we have our Bein Adam l'Makom, and our Bein Adam l'Chaveiro be in the same action, right? That as they turn towards each other, they're doing both. Like I don't know how to do that. That's a really tall order. It's a lot easier to feel spiritual and to feel godly when I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk to God now. I'm going to daven. It's Yom Kippur. I'm going to think about this and but when I leave, how do I take that with me in the ways I interact with other people? And similarly, if I have a really great conversation with a friend and I feel like, they saw me and I saw them and we're like, feeling good about ourselves in the world, I don't usually have God in that moment. I don't usually, like that for me, at least, I can't speak for you, or sometimes, or when things don't go right? When I don't have a good davening experience, I blame God. Might not be because the person next to me is someone who I'm mad at. I don't know. Yeah.
But in the conversation, of course you have God. What's the content of the conversation?
Right.
What's the depthness of connection? Is it stam dibur l'shem dibur, or is there something that you're building from this conversation? Be helping someone?
No, you're right. You're right. I think yes, you're right. I think like even now, like giving that example, I'm like, oh yeah, of course God is there. But I think maybe it's, think in that example, at least it's thinking about the awareness, right? Am I thinking this is a godly activity, right? When I show up for a friend who just had a really bad breakup, right? And I'm there as her friend and I'm taking care of her. I don't think of that in terms of religion. I don't think of that in terms of God. I think of that as I'm being a good friend, right? Or even this is what I would want her to do for me and what she probably has done for me. But like, I don't know if I think about that in God, terms, and vice versa, right? I think I keep going back to korbanot because it's, so foreign to us. But what if, when I offer, what if theoretically no, that's hard to give an example because I actually don't know what it looked like or how people did it. But like, let's say when I go to daven, right? Let's say I make that a communal experience. What if I, bring the other people in? Like, what if I'm thinking about what the other person is davening for, right? What if I think of myself as not just me, it's not just me and God, it's me and everyone here in God.
Right, but I think it's more to teach us that God is not up there, God is amongst us. So in our being and everything that we do, whether it's tefillah or conversation or action, it's all, connected. I don't know if I explained that well.
No, you did. And the face I'm making is more just like, by you saying that, even in the way you put it so simply, and I'm maybe trying to overcomplicate it. And maybe my trying to overcomplicate it or give all these different scenarios is maybe there's some part of me that isn't quite ready to think that way. I'm not quite super comfortable with the idea that God is in every action I do, or God is always in the room or always in the interaction. I don't know if for me personally, I love the idea, but maybe in practice it scares me a little.
But you said that before. You just talked about Ahavat tzadikim v'chachamim. It's so easy to love them. They always say the right thing or the wise thing, and they act righteously, nachon, and we aspire to be like that.
Right, like where's
so maybe it's trying to teach us on a deeper level, just to see, right? And your mom mentioned about Adam v'Chava, about Chala, that we were just a nation. So maybe just to see that we're people, and just to see that any person has their good things and their bad things, and we still can treat each other or should treat each other in a way that, Hashem is among us, and it is,
I think that's it. I think you said it way better than I could have, which is that, I don't know how to paraphrase that. I think you put it really succinctly and powerfully. And I think maybe what is like rumbling around my head is, okay, if I have that awareness of how it should be or what I'm striving to, right? And like, how do I actually do this, right? And like, that's a much bigger question, right? How do I infuse love into my relationships, right? And the ones that maybe it doesn't come so intuitively to, like the people I'm driving, alongside in traffic, the people I'm like climbing over, get to my seat at the movies, right? The people I'm currently really annoyed at for whatever it is they did, like, I don't know, or they seem annoyed at me and I don't know why, right? I don't know. Like, I mean, obviously it's situational, but I think the idea of coming from that and that awareness, I think that's the challenge.
Well, there's a woman in the community that about a week and a half ago was run over by a truck in Oxford in 235th. She wasn't young, she was 99, but she was healthy. She had nothing. She could have lived much longer. She took care of herself. She did everything on her own. And it's still a great loss to her children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. But I'm walking around with this anger and disappointment from this driver who just have stopped when he made the turn. And then I'm walking around at the same time feeling, why am I so angry at him? I should let go. Maybe I don't know what happened. Maybe something happened in the car and he didn't look for a second. And and that's to me was my struggle. And how, am I going to try to give him the Ahavat Chinam, even though he took a life that was, it didn't even matter what her age was. But that's hard to do.
Yeah. And
it's,
I think even if you kept that anger, right, at this person, I think that's also not an unfair, I think that's a perfectly fair and natural and in some ways even healthy emotion to feel towards this person. That did this horrible thing, whether they meant to or not, or all of that, and that to me is a normal response, and I think a healthy one. It means that you felt love and connected to this woman who was no longer here, and I guess that's I would be angry too. I don't know if I even would feel I don't know if I would want to let go of that anger, but I think, the idea that maybe, both of those can exist side by side, right? That unconditional love, right? That Ahavat Chinam, it doesn't have to be like, we can have both, right? We can, feel the rachamim and feel the love towards this person who did a not great thing, who did a bad thing, and we can have both of that. And maybe that's another thing this could be teaching us, that, right now, like on the interpersonal level, right? I'm really angry and I'm really annoyed at this person and they did something really annoying to me. Not this, like, someone cut me off driving, right? Or whatever it is, right? Or they overcharged me and when I mentioned it, they didn't, fix it. Whatever it is. Like, I can be really annoyed and be pissed off. And I can also have on another shelf be, okay, they're having a bad day. Or like, okay, like, they're still a person, they're still one of God's creations. I don't want to react from this place of anger I'm feeling. But acknowledging that both of those things can exist, right? Like, if we go back to David and Yonatan, like, Yonatan knew what was going on and David knew what was going on, and yet they chose, right? And yet they chose to act from a place of abundance, right? And from a place of love and a place of care, even though like there were all these other circumstances going on, and all these other reasons that it would be very easy to stay in that anger and to stay. So maybe the idea is maybe not to ignore them, those other circumstances and those other more personal moments, and to let us have them and to let us hold them, and like have it not be a but have it be an and, right? I'm annoyed at this person and I love them, right? And there's something to love about them. Maybe that's the God part, right? Maybe that's where God comes in, as God, is the ultimate judge. I know I'm starting to think about that, getting towards Elul, and, thinking a lot about judgment and punishment in the past, month of Shabbat, but maybe the way that we can be, emulate God is to let both exist, have the deen and have the rachamim, so to speak. Let us, feel what we're feeling and take a moment to respond to ourselves in a way, also showing love to ourselves, in a way that, think whatever it is, this human feeling, and try and act from a place. Maybe that's another idea. There's a lot of different ways to put it into action.
I also think sometimes it's easier to be angry at humanity than to be angry at God.
I was thinking that too.
Like when I'm the angriest at humanity, it's usually not, or a human, it's usually not fundamentally them, or I'm angry at them like because of the mental illness, or I'm angry at them because they're not emotionally available, or I'm angry at them because they're not fulfilling my need. I mean, obviously this woman getting plowed down by a truck is Yosem.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
But I'd be angry at the driver, but I'm also really mad at God. Like, what was he thinking?
Right.
And also just having that level of amuna that this horrible thing happened, but I don't want to say good, but
no, but it's what it is, because God is around.
It's part of the larger plan. God is, it fits in.
There's no satisfactory answer.
Like it's a struggle.
Yeah. And maybe that struggle is the point.
Because they say anger is like idol worship. Like when you lose not anger, but when you lose it.
Right.
Because
you're forgetting what else is going on and who else is
right,
there.
and that there's someone else, another force. But I think, Rabbi Strachler wrote about it, like negative emotions, we aren't taught really what, or even calling them negative emotions. Like we need anger, we need sadness, so we know what happiness and joy are.
Right.
But
I think a lot about that in regard to women in anger, about how it's easy to say don't be angry and anger should only be productive, but actually anger is just an emotion and we all feel it. And what do we do now about it?
Right. And I also think that maybe, for me, when I started a gratitude gratitude, what do you call it? Practice. Thank you. I was able to see God more in those interactions with my friends and in all of those.
Right. It allows you to be more conscious.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good, practical takeaway, like think about ways we can be grateful, find places where we can look for God. So.
And also I think when you were talking about, I forget what it was, but I had this image of in a lot of homes, Erev Shabbos, you're so busy getting ready for Shabbos, and Shabbos is coming, that you're so nasty. I mean, I shouldn't say I'm nasty with the people that I live with.
Oh yeah,
But
I mean, me too.
I'm short-tempered, and like, yeah, like getting ready for Shabbos is really important, but like
Right.
these are so like you, that doesn't give like
it's
serving
actually
God
maybe it's
doesn't.
more important to use a calm voice than to have the table set in advance, or to have like the nicest salad or whatever it is, or like if you don't have the urn up, like okay, or if not enough water's in the urn, that's fine. No one's angry at each other.
Right. And for me, that's an avoda. Like serving God is
Mhm.
not outside of my humanity. Like, and like,
I like that a lot, because we think a lot about Shabbos, right, as that Bein Adam L'Makom, right? Think a lot about like things that are explicitly religious. We don't necessarily think about how the interpersonal stuff comes in, but that's a really good, practical example. Yeah, Al, you had something to say.
But for me, Dafka, specifically during COVID, I think that that was for me, and I'm assuming a lot of people also happened to them, that you did change more and did find, the humanity, the godliness, and the things and how we act to each other within the home, because we were so long at home. And then slowly, as we got vaccinated and went out, it felt like it went away from people. I don't feel like people. I was just talking to another congregant in the community 6 days before this woman was run over. She gave me a ride home, and she was driving very cautiously, and she apologized. And I said, don't apologize. I've seen drivers being disrespectful to seniors, and they're trying to cross, and they're just like so quickly to almost drive over them. So maybe it does have to do with what we were talking about, that your mom mentioned, that when we are born, we're selfish, that the pandemic all of a sudden made us even more just think about ourselves, and that we survive in this, and being, accepting Torah and Hashem is saying, wait, okay, there is us, but there's also community, and let us not forget that,
It's
and
not just how do I make Shabbat meaningful to me, but how do I make Shabbat meaningful, or how do I make myself meaningful to Shabbat? Maybe it could be the turn of phrase, right? Like, how do I make myself into the best version of myself also in this mitzvah, right? Is it about this mitzvah of Shabbat, or is it about something else? And what is that something else? What is my something else, right? So these are all really great examples. So, and I definitely have a lot to think about, and thank you for that. So I'm gonna try and summarize before I end the meeting, and of course I'm always available for questions or further conversation. So we started with thinking about. I'm gonna also end the screen share so I can see everyone's face. So we started thinking about with this Rav Kook definition, or this Rav Kook phrase of Ahavat Chinam will be how we rebuild after the destruction of Sinat Chinam. We talked about Ahavat Chinam in terms of unconditional love, and we talked about David and Yonatan with this beautiful relationships that they had, taking care of each other and not caring about the external circumstances. We also talked about the Chachamim and the Tzaddikim with regards to unconditional love, and had some hard questions about that as well. Then we talked about V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, and many places that phrase or that idea comes up. We saw the sugya with Shammai, and then really with Hillel, who condensed all of the Torah down to the pithy soundbite of treat others the way you want to be treated. And we looked at this really beautiful Kli Yakar with the image of the Kruvim, with their wings up towards God and their faces towards each other. So those were the sources and the texts we saw. And thinking about what does it mean to have Ahavat in our lives, and what does it mean to not just, not do Sinat Chinam, but to actually have Ahavat Chinam, to practice love and to bring love into our relationships. And so we've seen that Bein Adam L'Chaveiro and Bein Adam L'Makom, you can't really separate them so easily. They're tied up in each other. There's always God, there's always people in the other. So maybe, a way to think about this as we move out of we're in the period, of comfort after Tisha B'Av, and thinking about how we can be better. And, especially as we go towards Elul, thinking about, returning, or Teshuvah as returning, or Teshuvah as repentance, being close to God. Maybe something, I offer a challenge or, an action step of thinking about how we can bring Ahavat into our lives. How can we infuse Ahavat into our relationships? And therefore, how can we infuse God into our relationships and build a world, based on love? And this answer will be different for all of us, but I think maybe that's the point, is that people are different and we all have different strengths and different needs and different, areas for growth, different things we're really bad at. But what it means to, have Ahavat Chinam is to see the person for who they are and to love them and to relate to them on that level. And God will be there too. Remember that God is there too. So I was about to say Shabbat Shalom. It is not Shabbat, it is Tuesday, but always have a good Shabbos. It was great to learn with you and really lucky to be, ending this time at the Bein. And I'm going to end the recording, but I'll stay on for a minute for any more questions. Thank you so much.